Michael, so great to see you again. It's been a minute since RSA, and I'm so appreciative of you taking time for this. Uh,
RSA was this year, right? I feel like it
it
was
feels like
like
it
10
certainly
months
feels
ago.
it certainly feels
Yeah.
like
It was great to see you there, and it was great to see the community. So yeah, thank you for having me on. It's great to see you.
absolutely, absolutely. So as we discussed, I want to focus this conversation on CISOs who are actively or passively searching for a new role with a different organization.
Mhm.
And I wonder, from your perspective, what is some of the best strategies and tactics? What are the top five things you would recommend they focus on, and also what some of the mistakes that you see CISOs are doing when they're actively or passively searching?
Yeah, it's this great topic. Fun. It's fun to actually step back and think about it because it's things that I talk about every day and with many CISO candidate and conversations and with clients. But actually, this was fun to like kind of think about and force me to actually organize my thoughts. So I would say that the context around this, just put some context to your listenership here. I guess the tip side is for those that don't know our business, is that we've run about 200 or a little bit more than 200 of these searches. We have about 5,000 CISOs in our US based network, give or take. So numbers wise, we actually have about 1,200. So on average, about 1,200 CISO interviews a year. We look at about 2,000 CISO resumes a year, and we interview hundreds and hundreds of executives a year. We do our interviewing the interviewer, which is every executive in the company gets interviewed. We also interview about 75 board members a year. So that's kind of where these tips, so to speak, are coming from. It's I think maybe the how-to book maybe a little bit different in
Yeah.
in our
It's a wide
world.
wide pool of resources that you're pulling from.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to just frame it because there's all kinds of self-help, 10 ways to body sculpt and all all that stuff. But for us, it's kind of looking at it a little bit differently. I think the first thing, and so a lot of these tips that I would say are good for any executive that are interviewing, things that we've just learned, but specific to CISO, the nuance of it, because frankly, CISOs are pretty terrible at a few of these things, and so I just want to bring them to light. And they're like they're supposed to be terrible at this, right? They're not supposed to be good at looking at jobs. I always tell people that, like, don't be so hard on yourself. Like, you're supposed to stink at this. And so it's okay. It's a learning process, but this is what it's all about. But I think the first thing that I would highlight is like know your resume and know your LinkedIn profile, and not just a lot of people focus on their resume and focus on their LinkedIn profile and other things, but amazingly, people still don't know what it actually says. And it's evident when they're asked questions that they actually don't know the answer to or actually can't get deep. So use a lot of care when you're updating your resume and LinkedIn profile or any kind of information out there. I know this is kind of a blocking and tackling kind of thing, but also make it consistent. Your resume and your LinkedIn profile should be fairly consistent. If one looks very different than the other, then that's going to be a challenge, right? I think one of the mistakes that I'm seeing a lot of CISOs make on this side is they have their operational experience and the way that LinkedIn has you put your positions. Sometimes there's a lot of advisory positions. This is like a big thing for CISOs. I'm a huge proponent of it. But it is difficult for the reader to say, Misha's been the CISO from this time to this time. Then there's 10 advisory profiles that are not operational roles, and then there's another one back from 2021 that you run into, and it's just the way that LinkedIn formats, granted, but I think just be cognizant of the reader out there. If you're there's different readers, right? If you're looking to gain a board position versus you're looking to gain a new operating CISO role, those are different ways you want to make it look. And unfortunately, LinkedIn isn't as it's not as flexible, but just make it consistent with your resume. If your resume looks like your LinkedIn page or vice versa, just as long as they're, but keep in mind that LinkedIn is it's changed a lot of our lives. It has its shortcomings, but a lot of us wouldn't, be able to know each other without it. So it's an amazing invention. But it's also the first place that most people look for your role. It's just habit, right?
Mhm.
It's become a habit for those in the business unit. They don't say used to say, "Hey, send me your resume," and now it's like I'm just going to go look at his LinkedIn profile or her LinkedIn profile and see what's on there, see
Right,
what
because because
flags.
it's also gives kind of more of a 360 view, because more often it's a second level connection, and more often than not, if you're in the same industry and you've been in the industry for a while, you probably have, I mean, a couple hundred people that you know in common, so you can
Right.
actually see, you can also see, is this person active? Are they posting? What are they posting about? Are they building their personal brand? Are they sharing thought leadership? Are they sharing advice? Are they active or not? So there's a lot that can be gleaned kind of as a uh, for more of a 360 approach, rather than just a piece of paper and a handful of titles. So it's but
Yeah.
listen, to your point, it's super interesting, because I'm on LinkedIn all day long, and when I see someone with a lot of advisory roles, I see what's the operational role, and I see, is it up to present, meaning are those advisory roles in parallel with the CISO role, or this CISO role has an end date, meaning the person is no longer in operational role and only doing advisory or consulting on the side or whatnot.
Yeah, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to decipher, and it shouldn't be hard for the interviewer to decipher, right? But I think it's known that that LinkedIn is the view of it is for multiple audiences, right? I actually think it would be great if there was multiple views, right? So you can have your board focused CISO view, your operational CISO view. It would be fantastic if it did that. It doesn't, but yeah, it's sort of you have to kind of work through that. And to your point, like knowing what's on your LinkedIn and resume are key. That's what I was saying in the beginning. Like, be prepared to answer anything on your profile. Right? So, I've had a couple of situations over the last couple of weeks where the candidate debriefs have been, well, I wasn't expecting them to ask me why I moved from here to here, or really concentrating on that. And I'm like, well, it was a shorter tenure, right? You should, there was a reason for it. It was a valid reason. I know the reason, but you clearly don't say that on your resume or LinkedIn. Typically, it's usually a discussion point. So just be prepared to talk about that. Be prepared to talk about where you were, when you were there, what it was like when you were there. Why were the 10 years longer? Why were they shorter? How did you determine why you exited? What did you learn there? What were the mistakes that you made? Like anything. I think that's like the cardinal rule, and it's just such. Someone gave me that advice a long time ago, and I have to remind myself sometimes. Everyone's busy, everyone's has other things going on in their lives, and but preparing for what is actually your background is critical. It's like the cardinal rule. So that'd be my first tip there. In addition to that, just also you know find your inner storytelling soul, right? So having really strong ready to go examples and practicing those examples, the stories. And when I say examples, like you ran this program, clearly it shows it on the resume, it was a success. Where did it start? Where did it, what was the starting point? What did it look like? What were you trying to achieve? What were the goals? What was the experience like going through that? And what did it look like at the end? What was the ROI? What were you able to bring to the business? What was the deliverable? What was the measurable result, right? CISOs, I think CIOs have done a really nice job of getting that narrative down. It was kind of beaten into them for a while, for maybe a decade or so. CISOs are still kind of learning this practice. There's some that are excellent at it. There's some that a lot of room for improvement. But these examples is essentially storytelling around it gives everyone a sense of your technical expertise, your communication, how you wrap things up, how you problem solve. So when you're telling these stories, it is a key part of the interview, or a key part of how you present yourself. So, how you scale, how you hire, what decisions you make. Are you a strategic thinker? Are you a tactical thinker? Are you both? So these are all, don't just come to the plate it's always like when a baseball player should, professional baseball player comes to the plate with a plan. Okay, what am I going to get here? and as opposed to just swinging wildly,
Point
because a
you
lot of
point
people
you
do that
point where the
regularly.
home run is going to go, right?
What's that?
You point where the home run is going to go, right? The
Yeah, exactly.
so
You need to do that. I think that the next thing on that is I see a lot of CISO candidates making mistakes that they think they kind of know the company, but they haven't really done a ton of research. They do a very topical like scratch test, and so they don't really go deep. They don't we want to look at org changes, why they occurred. A lot of this is online, right? You can Google most companies, even private companies, and really get a sense of their culture, their mission, not just what's on their website. But you want a fresh perspective going in there. There's so many examples I have of candidates coming out thinking that they had one sense of the reputation or brand of the company, but it was actually very different when they walked in, and they weren't really prepared for what questions they would ask, what direction they were going. And part of this, by the way, is on the recruiter, right? A lot of people always ask us, like they like our write-ups, and then we have our job description. I think most people do that. But if you think about the recruiter, a really good recruiter's job is to make sure that they tell you who that client really is. Every angle that they've learned. It's not just, hey, you should go look at it on LinkedIn and figure it out. It's like, no, we met with these folks live. We spent a lot of time with them. We asked them the tough questions, and this is who we believe they think they are. And the same thing on the candidate side is where our clients pay us. They want to know who we think you are as a candidate. So we have to look at you as multiple angles and different senses of life. So anyway, this kind of research around the company, I love to figure out where the executives have all succeeded and failed together. How long have they known each other? It's kind of like a marriage, right? The in a way, statistically, most marriages fail after the second or third year. And so you kind of really get to know who that first year is. Always the honeymoon year. Then the second year is it's still positive. And then the third year, things start, the real challenges, financial, or whatever it is, start hitting. Same thing in a business, right? You want to look at the 4 or 5 year trajectory that this team has, maybe not all known each other, but is there a group that have all worked together? Have they succeeded together? Have they built a product together? Have they taken a company IPO? Have they acquired companies together? Like that's when you realize who these folks really are, because that has a direct impact on the type of security program they're probably willing to sponsor and budget. And so that's kind of what we look for. But look a lot at the executive team. Who are these leaders, right? Because it used to be the CISO is 3 or 4 layers away from that. Now you are at the table, right? CISOs for the most part are at the table. And so you kind of want to know which way the wind's blowing all the time. So anyway, I don't know if you have any questions there, but I can go into a few
Well, I
other
just want to
areas.
kind of sum it up. So one,
Yeah,
know your LinkedIn profile, know your resume, uh, be prepared to tell a story, and do due diligence on the company you're interviewing with. So just those are kind of
yeah,
the high level points. And just kind of to double click on some of them, I think what's happening with LinkedIn and resume, most of my LinkedIn I wrote years ago, and I haven't looked at most of it since. I'm updating certain things that are more recent positions or experience or things like this. But if I'm not actually searching, some of the stuff I haven't touched in years. But for someone who
me too.
is potentially looking at someone as a candidate, they have a fresh set of eyes. They're seeing that for the first time, maybe, right? So just, and I think understanding that someone is looking at your profile for the first time, that's something you may not have looked at for a while. I think is just should raise awareness that you should be prepared to talk about something that happened 5 years ago that you haven't thought since. I think it's a very, very important point. The second thing that you mentioned about telling a story, is there a specific format? Because I think when I'm thinking of stories, I think of Hero's Journey, the book by, I think his last name is Campbell, and I think how a lot of
Mhm.
movies are structured. It's all about call to adventure and and challenges, and then transformation in the end. Is there specific, I mean, for lack of a better term, a template or specific points that you want to address? Uh, the challenges you face, how you address them, and the outcome. Is there a framework that you see people use that is you find brings people to success?
Yeah, it's by the way, I look at storytelling as on the atomic habits paradigm, which is make it a habit, right? Don't make it an exception. Like get really
Mhm.
used to telling stories, because that is what interviewing is. It's putting things in perspective. But I think I think it's situational. But the template that I would typically use or recommend, I should say, is the problem that was looked to be solved and what involvement you had in that, direct, indirect, influential. What did you orchestrate or put together in order for this? What did you mobilize? Was it yourself? Was it a team? Was it a cross-functional, cross-organizational influence? And then how did you go about doing it? Step three of like, what was the actual action that your team, again, how was it going? What were some of the problem spots? And then what was the measurable result? I think that's probably the key piece is that we started here. We had to go through this. We had to cut dangerous S curves in there, but the result, this is what we came out with. Um, Technology mistakes, CISOs and CIOs have a mortal mistake that they talk about what they finished, but they didn't talk about the measurable result of what they did. How effective was it for the business? What would the business say? Completing things is great, right? I ran 4 marathons. I stunk at all of them, right? So I finished them, but my measurable result probably wasn't really excellent. It didn't hit my goals. So, timing wise, but I was just happy to finish them, right? And I think that's what happens. We're in these marathon type programs. And we just want to get to completion, but we forget about the measurement side. And I think the business looks at that only and says, great job, pat on the back for doing it, but we kind of missed the boat on 40% of this thing, and now we have to kind of redo it. And I think that's kind of the biggest area that I would focus in on. So, by the way, vice versa, I enjoy when candidates also ask very thoughtful questions about the programs that are in place in these companies. So coming to an interview with again, a habit that you have to just get into is what did this environment look like? Tell me the story, right? What did this look like? How do I know it's going to be looking like differently if I come in and influence and use my skill set? But let's hear your story, and and as a result of that, having some really thoughtful questions about where the company's going, what their programs look like, what are some of the obstacles. But I think a lot of people just sort of wing the question thing. I think you just come in with, even if you don't ask the prepared question, it's the mindset of having questions prepared that really makes it a lot more natural, flowing, and authentic. So
Certainly, certainly, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
And again, just a little bit a little clarification on the last one about due diligence. And obviously, a lot of this information about the company, the sponsor of the search, would come from the recruiter. But would you suggest candidates to do due diligence above and beyond of what's publicly available, meaning finding someone that you know on LinkedIn and reaching out to get the scoop before the interview, or going to Glassdoor and reading through the good, the bad, and the ugly, some of the reviews? What are some of the specific tactics that you recommend as far as due diligence goes?
Yeah, I mean, if they're a public company, it's pouring through the financials, their 10Ks and Qs and, the financial reports, and looking at what everyone's talking about, the equity side or the stock side. What are some of the product releases that they've come out with? Really, I pour through the press release piece. Every company has a press release section, private or public. What are they talking? What's important to them? Where are they going? Where's their North Star? Are they moving from product to product and seemingly don't have really a focus? Or is it, oh, okay, I see where they're trying to build out to this platform? Who are their competitors, right? And what are their competitors saying about them? And what do they say about their competitors? What's the total addressable market in this particular area? Are they trying to get into new areas? Are they acquiring a lot of our searches now are more traditional legacy organizations that are for the first time seeing viable 10, 20, 30% of their revenue coming from digitally native services, right? And how's that going, right? And has that been a struggle? Do they, is there a superpower I can bring into that to make that fun? So there's a lot of different questions that kind of come to mind on the due diligence side. But I always first look at the leadership. It all starts at the leadership. And the leadership, by the way, is the board as well. It's not just the executive team,
Hmm.
but looking at who the board is. Does that board have a playbook? Have they all been together before? Right. It takes a good 45 minutes to an hour to prepare for a company's full biopsy on what they they are before you go in. And the recruiters should be doing this. Sadly, most of them don't. So I think it's just it should be supplemental, but sometimes you're actually doing the heavy lifting.
For sure. Well, with so many searches that you run, it's just and it's also kind of it's on the candidate to be prepared. So if recruiter can help, great, but it's on them to actually do the a little bit of a heavy lifting on their part as well. What are some of the
Yeah.
other tactics? So you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, so along those lines, like one of the big ones is just know your brand, right? I'm always blown away by CISOs that don't actually know their brand or don't know how to communicate their brand. When I'm talking about a brand, I'm talking about specific superpowers that you have. It's not what you're good at, right? That's not a superpower. Just let's be clear about that. It's what you're better than 99.9% of the world at, right? Right? So that's your superpower. So if you're good, I always come back to Atomic Habits. I just listened to it again, but like there's a great line in there. It's like talk about oh my gosh, forgetting the gentleman's name that wrote Dilbert, right? Like he wasn't a great artist. He was probably better at drawing pictures than most people, but he wasn't a great artist. But he was good, and he wasn't funnier than the average stand-up comedian, but he was funnier than most people. And so if you take those two, and then he knew a lot about business, right? And so he wrote and drew and told stories about things that were funny, that were good, kind of silly drawings and about a topic that he knew. And so if you add all three of those things together, like that's his superpower. He's better than 99.9% of the people in the world at that thing, right? So it's usually a combination of skill sets that if you put them together make your superpower.
Mhm.
And by the way, just for everyone listening for the CISO, a superpower is I'm not being good at talking to people in whatever audience, both technical and non-technical, it's no longer a superpower. 10 years ago, that used to be a CISO superpower, or maybe it needs to be a lot more specific, right? It needs to be, I am really strong with companies going through acquisitions and distressed assets, or I'm really great in a product security area and speaking to these types of engineers and really observing how they do code reviews, right? Like, it's like very, very specific because and most people don't know they're still trying to figure out their brand, and that's okay, right? But you should be able to narrate your brand and doing this both on your resume and LinkedIn, but also in interviews, right? In addition to that, having artifacts that support your brand, right? Whether it's public facing or whether it's maybe you have a lot of people have patents pending. They've had white papers they've written. They've been involved in open source projects. Like these are all artifacts to your brand, right? And then the other thing I think it's a key is make sure you're expanding your brand all the time. Sometimes you have to start small in a regional area. I mean, you do a great job on your brand. Everyone understands sort of the mission here in your organization. And so, but you started probably pretty small, right? And then you grew it and it became national and global. But it takes time. A lot of people try to just like shortcut and be like, my brand is this to everyone. So it doesn't really quite work that way. So, but that's another one. Knowing your brand and how to apply your brand is a really big tip that I can offer. And it's also a big mistake that folks make
Interesting.
naturally.
And do you think it's kind of, to your point, it's very specific. I'm really good at companies that are very acquisitive, and I'm good at onboarding companies being acquired and kind of streamlining the tech stack and making sure there are no gaps and holes in the once they're onboarded, or is it more overlaying different circles like the Dilbert example where I know about office culture and I can draw and I'm funny, and kind of the intersectionality of all three makes me unique and it's my superpower.
That's the ideal situation, right? But here's the philosophy, and everyone will. There's a lot of people that probably argue with me on this point, and that's okay. I believe that if you are an expert in one thing, it could be fairly small, that the confidence when someone looks and evaluates you for that one thing, it leads me to believe like Misha's amazing at this thing. He's probably amazing at other things too. He's just really focusing on this one area. But obviously, he's an incredibly bright person with a great forward motion on this thing that he really wants to dig into. And so I naturally will make a very quick connection that if he's really great at this one thing, he's probably going to be great at these other things, which leads to he probably could come in and run my security program, and at least surround himself with resources that will supply him with a better experience than he might have. But he's going to be amazing on that one thing, which really is a problem to me right now. I need like the expert to do that, and so that's kind of where the philosophy comes from. A lot of people think, oh, you're only good in one thing. That means they're not going to look at me for these other things. I have to be good for everything. That's actually wrong, right? It means you're mediocre at everything. So, and again, and looking at it, I'm not saying that personally. I'm saying that as through the candidates or the interviewer's eyes, you're okay at a lot of things, but you're not amazing at one thing. So
Interesting. So being special at not being everything to everyone, but being special in one particular area is
that's
important.
my philosophy. Again, that
Okay,
would
so
be
now we are know your resume, know your LinkedIn.
yeah.
Tell
I
a
think
story, do due diligence,
mhm.
be conscious of your brand and understand what it is, and be able to support it with artifacts and with a narrative. What's
Yeah.
one
A
more?
couple other things that come to mind. I'm not sure where the numbers are as far as where I am on the numbers, but another big thing that again, this goes to the recruiter, but a lot to the candidate too, is really it's part of the due diligence, but it's very specific to interviewing, is understand what the search process is. Like take control of your time. I cannot tell you how many conversations I have on a weekly basis. It's like, well, I'm in this search process. I'm not really kind of jazzed about it. I'm kind of interviewing and I don't really know where the ending is. I'm not sure how many more people I have. They keep on throwing more people at me. Like, why? Why don't you know the timeline, right? Well, they haven't given it to me. Like, what are you asking, right? And a lot of people say, well, I'm afraid to ask. Like, it just, I don't want to be put, into a box. Like I'm the guy that asks or the person that asks a lot of questions. Like, no, this is your time, right? Like, this is dating. It's like if you're not happy with the date you're going on, you should probably figure out how to exit that date, right? So, but like, what is the target? And by the way, recruiters aren't great at this either. We've even had situations we just don't have all the information, but it makes me lose sleep at night when I can't give candidates like a very, very clear timeline of the step one, step two, step three, and this will lead to step 4 and 5. That's major anxiety for me. So I'm sure it is for the candidates too. And so I think it's unacceptable to hear from an internal recruiter or an external recruiter, well, we'll let you know what the next step is, right? It's like, no, like, what is the next step? I have other things I need to do too. I'm bookended by this trip or that, or I have a child coming. I had that yesterday. Need to know what's going on. How many rounds? How many people? What's the philosophy of the recruiting? What's the executives' availability? Do they have their roadshow coming up? Is there a big, are they going to RSA? Are they going to their industry thing? Are they traveling internationally? What's going on, right? But don't take no for an answer. And I'd love to see CISOs get a little bit more aggressive with this. Aggressive may be the wrong word, but just knowledgeable. And just ask, look,
Proactive, I
CISOs are
guess.
amazing at figuring out problems when it comes to technology. They're super curious. They're super insightful, thoughtful in their questions. Like take that same superpower, so to speak, and use it when you're getting your interview
Sure.
information.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, if I'm putting myself on the line and putting a sign I'm available, it's only fair that the other party is upfront in terms of their intentions and their timeline and their incentives, because it makes for a good marriage down the line, if even though
Yeah.
it's still kind of, to your point, it's still a dating process. That's
It
amazing.
is. And yeah, and I think like a really good recruiter, whether they're internal to the company or external, they know what the process is, right? And if they don't know what the process is, they need to go take the time to do that. Like that's the first thing that we do. When we interview the interviewers, we're like, okay, who's going first, in what order, how it's going to go. Yeah, it's okay if it changes. Like we're not that rigid, but you have to keep in mind like these are people's experiences. If they walk away with a terrible experience because you just weren't organized, then that's on you, right? Like that's them going out to the market. And by the way, CISOs, if you didn't notice, they all have Slack channels and they all talk about these searches. And my search is included, right? So like, you're just kind of holding your breath like, oh, what's going to be said about this search? You see it all the time, like terrible experience, didn't give me feedback, which is another one we can talk about. It's a whole other
Small,
section.
it's a small industry. It's a big industry, but it's a small industry at the same time. So
Totally. Totally.
news travel. That's
Yeah.
amazing, Michael. So this is so awesome and so actionable. I'm so appreciative. As we wrap up, I imagine that some of the pitfalls and some of the mistakes that CISOs are making are probably the inverse of some of the tactics and suggestions. But is there anything kind of above and beyond what some of the top mistakes you see CISOs are making when actively or passively looking?
Yeah, one of the ones that came up over the last couple weeks is, we're coming out of a terrible market. I think I've said it 100 times. It's the first time that we've come out of such a terrible market, meaning like the quality opportunities weren't there, at least in volume. There's a greater supply of candidates than there are a demand for these situations. We can get into a whole other session on that, but I think people are a little hesitant about speaking up and giving feedback, and specifically around this. One of the things that I'm seeing as a mistake is CISO candidates not giving honest feedback and detailed feedback to the clients that they're interviewing for. And what I mean by that, and by the way, clients don't always give, I'm not going to talk out of both sides of our mouths here, but like clients don't give great feedback. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't, right? Like if I ask one of my teenagers how school was, the answer is going to be fine, good, right? Like it's the wrong question, right? But I'm having so many of these conversations where it's kind of like, how's the process going? It's good, and then at the end, they're turning down offers, or I'm trying to guide them through. I just had one yesterday. I was trying to guide someone through an offer stage. It wasn't our search, just trying to help someone. And they were not excited about the offer at all. And I'm like, why are you excited about this opportunity? Like, what are your concerns? It's like, I'm just not feeling it. And it turns out that the interview process was super choppy. They passed this individual's resume from person to person. They kept on asking the same questions. They weren't really thoughtful with any of their feedback. They had an internal recruiter working on the search. Not that that's always a problem, by the way. I'm just, in this particular case, they did. But the person just got like one word feedback, automated things. And he was third round, and he interviewed with 11 people. So but he wasn't excited because he just wasn't feeling the love. It's just like and so you need to be really, I think you just need to be really honest with clients, like hey, I'm experiencing this. I want to let you know that I'm experiencing this, and it's really affecting my candidate experience. And I want to love this company. I want to understand it, but I'm not really getting the feeling. Like the pitch was there. The company is a great brand. They just weren't. They were kind of blowing it on the candidate experience of the interview. But the candidate wasn't willing to be honest with what their thoughts were. Like, I'll just wait till the offer comes. I'm like, you're going to turn down the offer, right? Like, and so it's hard. I understand, but that's like one thing that I would guide people, that they're making this mistake of not being honest with themselves and not being honest with the company as they're going through. It's a huge time commitment.
Yeah,
So
it makes a lot of sense. And again, I hate to bring this analogy. It's a two-sided market, and if both parties are not transparent and open about the incentives, and it's not going to make for a good marriage, and then kind of those hangups happen for that reason. So being
yeah,
transparent and upfront with feedback, with just being open, I think would go a long way for both sides, for recruiters
I
and
agree.
CISOs.
And by the way, on that point, my last point on that is don't assume that the executives that are interviewing you are actually good interviewers. Because 60 to 70% of them, from my perspective, when we interview them, we interview the interviewers, right? They're not great, right? I'm not trying to pan on executives, but it's not required to be a great interview to get to a high level place in an organization. That's not one of the requirements. It's nice when it happens, and it's probably something that naturally should happen most of the time. But the fact is that there's a lot of just terrible interviewers out there, and you should know that going in. Right? So, like, you should be prepared that some of the questions are at a high level. That doesn't necessarily mean they're looking for a high level answer, right? They're probably looking for something a little bit more detailed, but they're probably not going to drag you there, because their interview style is not such that they're just putting the question out there, but there's no context behind it. So you have to be really curious. Again, CISOs are amazing at being curious when they're trying to solve a problem. Use that same rigor when you're going in for an interview experience. And granted, you may not have all the answers, but just keep asking. Find a way to navigate through that that murkiness. So.
Michael, this is amazing. And I think we have a topic to discuss with the next conversation, which is what makes a good interviewer, because I'm curious, because I have certain ideas or maybe misconceptions. So I'd love to have your perspective, and hopefully we'll talk soon on some of those things. As
Yeah.
we wrap up, any other kind of mistakes you want to bring up, or you want to save it for the next time?
I mean, I guess a self-serving one, just know who your recruiters are. That's a big one. I get this a lot. We certainly aren't the end-all be-all recruiting organization. I think we do a pretty good job most of the time, and a lot of my colleagues and competitors are also excellent. But there's a lot of people getting into the recruiting field, specifically in cybersecurity. And look, they're not all good. Just like there's not all good dentists and bus drivers and everyone else, like people that you would think are pretty critical to the lifeline of their field. But people are still learning and understand the parameters around that relationship that recruiter has with the client. And what the client's relationship or what the client's expectation of that recruiter is, right? So lots of different versions. That's probably a whole other session as well, but just ask the tough questions. How many times have you done this search? How many times have you worked with this client? Have you worked, what's been the success rate? How long did it take? How many candidates are in process? What's the step look like? Did you write the job description, or did the client give it? Like, there's just 100 questions I can ask, but I definitely would like to ask the community to be more diligent in their questions. I hear a lot of stories about being ghosted and being not getting information, and it's sad. It's frustrating to hear. It's not supposed to be like that. We can do much better. It takes both sides.
For sure. Well, and it also helps that you specifically focus on cybersecurity. I think a lot of recruiters they run all different functions, searches for all kind of various different functions, which makes them not very specialized and not very kind of aware of nuances on just in the cybersecurity space. But also,
Sometimes,
I think
although I
that
will say a really good recruiter is a really good recruiter. They could be selling, people working in a totally different metric. I happen to not be a great recruiter on just about anything else besides security and IT. So if you ask me for, find me a head of sales, I'm going to be terrible. But there are a lot of people that are just excellent at the game of executive recruiting, whether they're specialists or not. They're just excellent at it. So anyway, but yeah, sometimes it does help.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much. This was amazing. I really appreciate you taking time, and
You
looking
too.
forward to our next chat.
Excellent. Nice to see you, Misha.
Same here.